Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Villanueva, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Palo Alto College and currently serving as the Faculty Senate President at Palo Alto College. It is an honor to be given the chance to address the community of St. Philip's during Women's History Month. I feel that it's very important to set aside time to honor and remember the many contributions that women have played in the formation of this country, plus the many contributions that women have made throughout the world. Our history books have yet to catch up and to truly capture the many ways in which women have shaped our society and entire civilizations. That's why it's important that our colleges, the academic institutions that preserve history, play an active role in honoring women by celebrating Women's History Month. I've been asked to address the topic of the importance of voting. As you may know, women were not given the right to vote until well over 100 years after the formation of this country. The struggle began early in the 1800s, but it took much longer to make significant progress. The amendment for women to have the right to vote was first introduced in Congress in 1878, and it was not ratified until 1920. That's over 40 years that it took to make it law. So for over 100 years, this country formally disallowed women from voting. Informally, there were uncounted and unseen barriers to voting that are yet to be removed. It's important that we never forget how hard it was for women to gain this right. And it truly was a struggle, even a violent one, which may be hard for people to imagine today. St. Philip's College will be showing the film Iron-Jawed Angels during Women's History Month. I encourage you to watch this film. It's a wonderful movie. It depicts the story of Alice Paul, a leader of the suffrage movement who helped secure the passage of the 19th Amendment of the Constitution, granting women the right to vote. The film does an amazing job illustrating the violence that was perpetrated against women who fought for this right. My wife teaches, and she shows the film in her classes. At my home, Iron-Jawed Angels was required viewing for the entire family. In fact, my daughter put together a poster presentation of Alice Paul and dressed up as her at their school's historical figure day. This is my daughter dressed up as Alice Paul. I wanted to share this picture. I'm very proud of her. My wife does a whole lot to make sure that our family traditions are preserved, and so does my mom. My mother is almost 80 years old. I have 4 brothers and 2 sisters. My mom still works hard to bring the family together for the Easter celebration. I mentioned my daughter, my wife, my mom, because women's history refers not only to historical figures as in textbooks, but also the women who walk right next to us as they work hard to not only preserve history, but to create their own stories, her stories, which you could say are our stories, all of our stories. The history of woman is synonymous with the history of family. How central is that? I hope you're aware that the year 2020 was the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Suffrage meaning the right to vote in political elections. In 2020, last year, I watched Kamala Harris become the first female vice president of the United States. What a surreal moment to see a female Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor, swear in Kamala Harris as vice president of the United States. Both females and minorities. How could you not cry in that moment? I want to show you the image that was so emotional to many of us. Can you imagine what this meant for all the young women in America? So what is the importance of voting? I'm pretty sure most of you recognize that voting is important. The recent presidential election made it very clear that elections matter and that voting matters. People turned out to vote in record numbers. Now that's good news. But in terms of voter turnout, you have to keep this in perspective because there's a downside to the voter turnout figures. First, of the 239 million people who were eligible to vote in the 2020 presidential election, 158 million or 66% voted. The winner, Joseph Biden, received 81 million votes. Do you know how many people did not vote? If you do the math, the number is 81 million people did not vote. If San Antonio has a population of 1.5 million, that means that nearly 40 cities the size of San Antonio did not vote. That is staggering. Second, the voter turnout is highest during national presidential elections, but in non-presidential elections or years, voter turnout is much lower. For example, in Texas, only 42% of the voting age population voted in the governor's race. It gets worse in local elections. In San Antonio, for the mayor's race of 2019, only 15% of registered voters voted. And I'm referring only to registered voters, which means that I'm not counting those who are of voting age but are not registered. So only 15% of these voters decided who was to become mayor of the rest of San Antonio, and 85% stayed home. Most experts will tell you that the most important elections are local elections, which brings me to one of the most important reasons why voting is important. Elections have consequences. When you do not vote, you don't count. And this sounds harsh, but that is essentially true. I want to share how that truth became so real to me. When I was much younger, I volunteered to work on a campaign. I recall starting on my block walking assignment for the candidate that I was supporting. I was instructed to visit only certain homes down the neighborhood street which I was assigned. The list that I was given did not include all the homes on the street, only a few. I was actually prepared to visit every home on that street. But I recall asking the campaign coordinator, why am I not visiting every home? The answer that I was given was, because the homes not on the list are people who did not vote and typically do not vote. My reply was, well, shouldn't I try to convince them to vote? The answer was, no, you're going to be wasting your time. We've tried in the past and they won't vote. The campaign is better off investing your volunteer time with people who actually vote. I asked, well, but don't we want to at least know that what they think and ask them what their concerns may be? Again, the answer was no. We need to use our resources efficiently. And again, the odds are very low that they're going to vote. I was surprised to hear that. To me, that meant that those running for office have already written off the non-voter. In other words, they don't exist. From the candidate's standpoint, the people in these homes do not deserve to be listened to because they do not vote. And I thought, that's terrible. But it made me think that if those in my home don't vote, then my home would probably get written off just like those on the neighborhood that I was walking. To be clear, this meant that not voting had a negative consequence. And the consequence is that regardless of which candidate won, no candidate was going to visit the non-voting households. On the other hand, if residents in a home who are eligible to vote actually voted, then regardless of who they voted for, they counted. And so they were going to get a visit from me to ask about their issues and their concerns. I had a horrible feeling knowing that I was going to have to skip many homes, essentially discounting their voices and their concerns simply because they were non-voters. When you think about it, the implications are enormous. If in a community of 100 voters, only 10% vote, then I'm talking to only 10 people and disregarding 90. Again, it's as if those people, those 90 people, didn't exist, their concerns were non-existent. What about their healthcare needs? What about more parks, crime, street cleaning, and so on? It doesn't matter what their concerns are because they don't vote. To be honest, I'm not sure that every candidate follows this strategy, but the logic makes sense if all you're concerned about is winning the election. And by that logic, that candidate would certainly not give higher priority to the 90 people who didn't vote, to use the previous example. So naturally, an elected official will pay close attention to those who voted in his or her district and very likely not give priority to those who did not vote. Why? Because these candidates are also thinking about getting reelected. So let's expand this logic to a larger community. Let's imagine an entire neighborhood, and let's say that this neighborhood is not politically engaged. You can imagine this to be your neighborhood. If, for example, only 5% of this community votes in local elections and 95% does not, that means that from the candidate's perspective, there's not a whole lot of motivation to listen to or even try to address the concerns of that entire neighborhood when its residents do not vote. It's very sad to know that the political apathy of an entire neighborhood could potentially cause it to be written off. The entire neighborhood stands to lose. So let's bring this story closer to home. Let's talk about your community college district and the importance of voting in elections for the Board of Trustees of the Alamo Community Colleges. The Board of Trustees is the governing board of St. Philip's College and the rest of the 5 colleges that make up ACD. They make important decisions about your community college, including things like tuition rates, faculty salaries, student fees, programs offered, construction of new buildings, and much more. In other words, these folks are key players in matters pertaining to your college education. There are 9 districts throughout Bear Country, and each district is represented by one of the 9 trustees. St. Philip's College is in District 2. So let's look at who votes for a typical community college trustee. On a typical election year, in just about any single district, there are approximately 90,000 registered voters. How many voters do you think actually vote in a particular district, such as District 2? The answer is, give or take, approximately 4,000 voters. So out of 90,000 registered voters in a single community college district, only 4,000 voters decide who gets to represent your district to make important decisions for your college. So that's only 4% of the registered voters. And I'm not counting the eligible voters who are not registered. Thus, the big decisions for your community college are left in the hands of the candidate who was elected by only 4% of the registered voters in that district. I want to make this point a little clearer. In June of 2018, there was a runoff election between 2 candidates running for one of the positions on the Board of Trustees. Out of the approximately 90,000 registered voters, how many do you think voted in the runoff election? The answer is 1,298. That's 1.5% of the registered voters. 1.5%. Even more interesting, what do you think were the results of the election? There were 2 candidates running for this seat in the runoff election. the votes were split this way. Candidate A got 650 votes. Candidate B got 648 votes. The difference was 2 votes. 2 votes. So if you and 2 of your friends woke up that morning and on a whim said to yourselves, why don't we go vote today? Well, what have we got to lose? And you voted for the candidate with the lesser votes, you could have changed the result of that election. 3 votes could have turned that election around. The candidate who won by 2 votes then becomes your representative for how long? 2 years? No. For 4 years? No. He becomes your representative for a whopping 6 years. This trustee will make important decisions about your college for the next 6 years. So, do elections matter? Well, when it comes to your community college, not only do they matter, but your single vote can make a big difference, which will have consequences for a total of 6 years. And if reelected, that's 12 years, and so on. So I truly hope that these illustrations convey the important point that I'm trying to make. Elections matter and voting matters, especially local elections, which are the ones that have the most impact on your immediate lives. I could have listed other reasons why it's important to vote, because there are more, but I wanted to focus on my experience with the hope that you may be inspired by my aha moment, which made me a lifelong voter. Every vote counts. Your vote counts. And as I mentioned earlier, even 2 or 3 votes can make a difference in a local election. Voting requires initiative and effort. You have to educate yourself and put it on your list of things to do. It's very important. So dear friends, please take part in as many activities of Women's History Month as you can. And don't forget to vote. I want to thank the Planning Committee of the Women's History Month at St. Philip's College for this opportunity to speak with you. Take care.